Dave Olsen, welcome to the Leading Saints podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Now, you were just released as a bishop about 2 weeks ago from the time we're recording. Is that right?
I was, yeah. I was in for just over 5 years.
Nice. And man, it should be like required that every released bishop or Leaf Society president has to come through the Leading Saints machine and share their perspective. Right? Obviously, that would be a lot of interviews, but this is a cool time to record something like this, where I would imagine, at least I was, in a very reflective state of mind as you think back on those years of serving as bishop.
Yeah, it's a great way to think about it. I've been reflecting over the last couple of weeks, and just really thinking a lot about the experiences I've had and what I could learn from myself, what I would, share with any other bishops, other leaders that are going in. So yeah, it's a good time to be talking about it.
Cool. Very cool. And you are in Daybreak, and maybe explain to people who are not from Utah what Daybreak is, where it's at, and that sort of thing.
Sure. Daybreak's a master plan community in the Southwest Valley of the Salt Lake Valley, and it's actually in the city of South Jordan, Utah. And so we've been here about 10 years now, and the community and the amenities and the lake and just the atmosphere here is what drew us here 10 years ago. So we really enjoy living here, and yeah.
And you got the Oquirrh Mountain Temple right there, basically in your neighborhood, you could say. Right?
We do, yeah. I'm actually looking out my window right now. I can see the top of it here. So.
Nice. Now, typically, what I hear with people who've lived in Daybreak, they've experienced a lot of award splitting. Have you gone through a few of those?
So I actually just barely missed that. So I'm in Founders Park in one of the first areas, and
okay.
I think the last award split was just after we moved in. And we're in a little corner of the stake that has been stable the whole time we've been here. But yeah, definitely a lot of splits. I think we have some family in the subdivision as well, and they were here when it was just all one. Daybreak was all one ward, and I'm not even sure now. I think it may be 4 stakes if I
at least
correctly. So
yeah. So maybe is there a story of when you were called? Like, what do you remember from getting called in and extended the calling of bishop?
Yeah, I remember that well. My story of being called goes hand in hand with starting my business, actually, because about 5.5 years ago, I was a contract CFO, and I was doing accounting and bookkeeping for small businesses, and I was really thinking about expanding my business. And it was on February 1st, I created a partnership with another firm, and we launched a brand new business on February 1st of 2018. Well, it was February 1st, 2018 that I got called into the stake president's office. And
oh my goodness.
It was called to the bishop. So it was definitely a crazy time launching that business and being called at the same time. So
yeah. And obviously the Daybreak area, really any place in the Salt Lake Valley, but in these planned communities, it seems like they, some of the areas, they'll build the houses on top of each other, but it's very saturated area for Latter-day Saints. Is that how you would describe your ward?
It is, yeah. And I don't know the exact percentage. I would say maybe half or a little less of the houses are members of the church. And a lot of the houses in our neighborhood were built in the mid 2000s. And so a lot of families moved in at that point. So then there's a huge nursery and a huge primary. When we moved in about 10 years ago, that wave of demographics had started coming to the youth program. And so most of my time as a bishop, we had a huge youth program, and most of the adults are in the kind of right now in the 40 to 55 age range.
Yeah. And so when you say huge youth program, like roughly how many youth did you have on average?
So earlier on, we had around 100, a little over 100. At one point, it was actually my son's age. We had 32 priests on the record, and it was too big for the bishop's office. We had probably 20, 25 attending regularly.
Wow. So where did you hold the priest quorum?
So we got the biggest classroom.
Nice.
we had to go there for a while, and then that wave went through. All those youth are in the 19, 20-year age range. So a lot of them are on missions now or going to college. And it really dropped off. I think we only have, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but maybe 40 or so youth.
Oh, okay. A little bit more manageable, right?
Yeah. When I got released, we had 5 or 6 priests coming regularly. So definitely a change over that time.
And what do you remember just beginning that calling as bishop? Because I'm sure with hindsight, maybe you'd go back and give yourself specific advice of how to start off as a bishop. But I don't know, what do you remember from just walking into that role and what you tried, what worked, what didn't?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the big thing for me, especially given my situation in starting the business, and also my kids were 13, 11, and 9 when I got called. So that was a kind of critical time in their lives. So I was really intentional from the beginning about not doing, but two ways of looking at it, not doing anything that I didn't have to do as a bishop. So I was very intentional about delegating to everyone else, unless I felt specifically prompted to do something myself, whether it be go on a visit or reach out to someone or do something that maybe wasn't in my typical responsibilities, but I would look for specific promptings to do that. Otherwise, it was always delegating as much as possible.
Cool. And then with the amount of youth, I mean, you had in your ward, I would imagine you had that dialed into a well-oiled machine as far as the yearly interviews and advancements and things like that. Anything you learned just from setting up that structure?
Yeah, just staying organized was a big part of it. We had to dial it in to stay on top of everything. So we kind of evolved over time, especially, I was called 2 weeks after President Nelson became prophet and president of the church. And that was, as we all remember, that was a
Yeah.
crazy time with a rush of changes. And one of those changes was the the change in the youth progression age at the beginning of the year.
Hmm.
And so we navigated that as far as, do we stick with the annual and semi-annual interview, or do we batch the interviews in the first of the year and middle of the year? So we experimented with different options, but we did settle on doing a lot of the interviews at the beginning of the year and the middle of the year, and then catching up throughout the year. So that helped. It made for busy times, but it helped do all those at once. Is kind
Yeah.
of what we lean towards.
Is there any other aspect or characteristic of your ward that would set it apart from the typical, Salt Lake Valley type of ward? What made it unique?
It's probably pretty standard Salt Lake Valley ward. I think it was just the everything combined into a similar demographic. I think was probably unique. The
Hmm.
adults being very similar ages, and the youth having that bubble, and very very small primary during that time. So it was really the whole ward, and maybe that's what makes it most unique, is the whole ward is really focused on the youth. Almost every family in the ward had somebody in the youth program, and so everything really revolved around what we did as a youth. And
Yeah.
from activities to camps to our youth discussions we'd have in my home, things like that, it was all focused on the youth.
So I don't know if there'd be anything here, but there's this dynamic that I refer to as the tyranny of experience when it comes to especially Utah wards or high saturated areas of Latter Day Saints, where I would imagine in your ward, like you were just released, someone was called as bishop, but really on paper, there's probably 40 men who could probably be bishop and they'd be a great bishop, right? And so it's sort of unique where maybe if you were in, Timbuktu, Kansas, or whatever, it's like, there's two guys and it's your turn now. And, you're the bishop now. Was it difficult to sort of manage that? Or did you notice that as far as like finding a place for everybody to feel fulfilled in their church calling, whatnot, because there's only one elders quorum president, one bishop, two counselors, right? But there's so much experience or so much ability in the ward to contribute.
Yeah, I would say that is a challenge. You're exactly right. We have a ton of experience in the ward. Many men could have been bishop. As we look for any major calling, I guess you could say that, like the ward council, for example. There's many to choose from, and we had to, as I worked with my counselors in in selecting these callings, we attempted to take into account the whole history of the ward as far as we knew it, like who had their turn as young women's president and relief society president before, because there's such a depth of experience, and we don't want to kind of reuse the same people, and also make sure nobody fell through the crack that's fully capable of filling these callings. And what you said about making it fulfilling as well was challenging, because we have so many people that are able and willing to serve, and only so many callings. So I think um, a lot of the time the challenge was filling, uh, was giving people meaningful responsibilities.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's sort of the tough thing because, I was a bishop in my late 20s in South Salt Lake, and the opportunity was there because we were in inner city ward. There wasn't a lot of established, families. And at the end of the day, I was maybe one of two people that were not going to move and could be considered. But nonetheless, that was like such a remarkable opportunity for me to have that opportunity at a young age. But in some of these other areas, it's like, man, we'd love to give guys more opportunity, guys or gals, more opportunity to serve, but there's just so many, and we want to make sure that the opportunities are there for many. And of course, there's revelation in there and all that, which is assumed. So let's jump into some of these leadership principles that you sent me. I'm really intrigued by these and what you'll have to say. So the first one is leadership is creating an intentional future that is different than it otherwise would have been. Expand on that.
Yeah, it's really about leaders seeing themselves as someone who can make a difference, who can make a different future, and it's in a different way than it would have been without that leader. And it's not to say that it is profoundly better or that somebody else couldn't have done it better. It's just a leader can have a vision of what they want to see the future to be, and work towards creating that. And that really is leadership, whether it be in a ward or a business or a family. Just having that vision. What's unique, I get to see the contrast pretty starkly, I guess, in how that plays out in different types of organizations. So with starting my business at the same time I was called, really
Yeah.
the slate is clean. Like I can create my own vision of what that looks like, and bring on a team that fulfills on that. The church is a little bit different, where you don't have a complete blank slate. We have the vision of the church as a whole. You have the area vision. We have the stake vision, and that organization to work within, and both are great. There's no better or worse than either part. It's just being familiar with what what I don't know if constraints is the right word, but what we have to work within. So as bishop, my intention was to take the vision as I understood it from the hierarchy, the church, the area, the stake, and work with our ward council and my own vision and revelation, of course, to translate that to what does that mean for our ward.
Yeah. With vision, it's kind of tough because on paper or in the academic books, you sort of get this, this concept that's not overly grounded, or the application of it is missing. And so what did that look like in real life, like in ward council meetings or in sacrament meetings or whatnot, like establishing that vision or making sure that there's a clear vision that you're pointing those you lead towards?
Yeah, it can really be a simple thing. It's just what do you see the future to look like? How do you want the ward to be different in a year or 5 years or whatever you're looking at? So an example of how that played out in our ward is, when I was first called as bishop, I felt strongly about focusing on loving God and loving your neighbor, and that sounds pretty common, pretty simple.
Yeah.
But really, what I envisioned was in 5 years, we have a ward of people that had a greater love for God and than they did at the beginning of that time.
Yeah.
And how that really translated is, throughout my life, I've loved the quote by President Benson about how if we turn our lives over to God, He can make more of it than we can, and it goes on with a little more detail from there. And that really has struck me about how powerful it is to just be willing to turn our lives over to God and trust that He can make much more out of it than we can on our own. So my intention was to instill that vision in the ward and encourage people to turn their lives over to God, and as a way of demonstrating their love for Him.
Yeah.
And then also with loving their neighbor as well. And specifically, the wording we used was making the neighborhood a welcoming and loving place. And I don't want to paint any kind of broad strokes, but the dynamic in Utah can be, as I understand it, contrasted to other areas of the world where a lot of people have family in the areas, and so they rely less on the ward family as their connection. They have their family connections.
Yeah.
Or other parts of the world, sometimes the ward is the only connections, the only family they have. So really my intention was to create a more welcoming and loving environment where we, of course, our families are important, but also create more of a ward and neighborhood. And the language of neighborhood was intentional to encompass, not just the church members, but all of our neighbors into that vision.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I think the first step is what you've done is just like recognize that dynamic, because a lot I felt this in, living in Utah most of my life, um, that there's this feeling of, okay, we have the ministering brothers and sisters, set up, and there's sort of this, it almost feels like an obligation, like I should probably involve them in whatever I'm dealing with or family struggle, but I don't really want to, And with me, my entire family is within, a 30-minute drive of where I live. And yeah, I turn to them, when there's a struggle. Or remember my mom had a health scare, and she didn't necessarily turn to reward. She turned to us because we're all local and whatnot. And she really didn't have that need to fulfill. And so, but I love this, that you recognize, like, yeah, that dynamic exists. So how can we push through it? Because I've sort of, in past, I've sort of shrugged my shoulders, like, well, I don't know. I mean, they got the support. What more can we offer? But I love this, that you sort of push through that and say, okay, that's the case, and we, of course, we'd never discourage anybody to turn to their family for that support they need. But what can we offer as a ward, and what does that look like?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it really is the order of the church, so we're not trying to change that. Like,
Yeah,
first go to your family.
yeah,
For example, welfare concerns, you first go to your family. Or if you need a blessing, yeah, go to your. If you have family right by, great, go to your family. But also be intentional about how can we also involve the Lord at the same time. So,
yeah. Cool. Any like any stories or activities or Fifth Sunday lessons that come to mind as far as how you executed that?
one in particular, there's a Fifth Sunday lesson that we had fairly recently, where the focus was on love and unity and acceptance within the Word, but the primary material for that lesson was understanding same-sex attraction,
Mm,
and that's something that it's a topic that's close to me. My brother's gay, and he grew up in the kind of the late '90s, early 2000s, where there wasn't a whole lot of, or there's less understanding and acceptance than there is today, and that had a big impact on him. And I've watched my family's journey, and as he just married his longtime partner last summer, and we were there for that, and it's just been and they they live in Cardston, Alberta, near my parents, where there's a lot of church members in the area, and it's been incredible to see the journey of my family and the community there just really rally around them and just love and accept them, even though um, they're they're not active in the church, and they have that life, but they they still see that love and acceptance. And we have a few people in our ward who experience same-sex attraction in different ways, and I just felt really strongly about using that as material to create that unity and acceptance and love within the ward. And it seemed to be really well received as we focused on that unity and acceptance first, and but understanding the church doctrine and applying that as well. But that love and acceptance comes first as we look at how we interact with our neighborhood and provide a environment where people feel welcome to be at church, regardless of what their circumstances are.
yeah. Yeah, what I'm learning as you say that is like that opportunity, especially maybe in a Utah ward or a highly saturated Latter-day Saint area, is you recognize the families there, but you, from your personal experience, and again, you could have, if it wasn't you that had the gay brother, maybe it's someone in the ward that you sort of um, encouraged to step into and share their experience, right? And what you're doing there is you're saying, because there may be a family in the ward who's like, maybe they're struggling with this. They have a teenager that just came out, and man, they think my family doesn't understand, or they haven't been overly helpful. But wow, now the Bishop Olsen, like, okay, this is part of his story. So now we can go to him and step into his world and get some support, because he's maybe further down the path than we are in our journey. And so just sort of like diving in, especially to those taboo topics that they can feel like at times.
Yeah,
And as a leader doing that, man, you sort of really open up of the support group that's available to the members of your ward.
yeah, that's really my intention in doing it. And there was two or three families who have I guess in our cases, gay sons
Hmm.
who have felt, you know, varying levels of lack of acceptance in the past. And I'm sure no ill intent, but by anybody involved, but they just haven't, felt accepted and welcome in church or in other settings in their lives. And it was really my intention to bring all them together. They actually attended this lesson, and hopefully felt that it's just about love, and we want you here,
Yeah.
regardless of what stage you're at in your life, or what your circumstances are, or whatever. We just want you here, and yeah, we want everybody to feel welcome and loved.
And is there anything you did? I love this focus you mentioned earlier. Like it was a neighborhood focus rather than a ward focus. And in Utah, typically the neighborhood is the ward, right? But I think that shift is important, where you're not just thinking about those who are showing up on Sunday or who are on the roll, but like in the neighborhood, because you're everybody's bishop technically, right?
Right.
Um, and so, what did that look like as far as reaching out and offering support to your neighborhood? Uh, even those that maybe weren't members of the church, or who had stepped away from the church.
Yeah, pretty much I think I can't think of an exception. Every ward activity that we have, we would invite the whole neighborhood and be intentional about that. So when we, put out flyer reminders for the activity, we would put it on every door, not just the ward members' doors. And we had some traditions that we did year after year, like our Fourth of July breakfast. Most years we had a spring barbecue type activity. We have our Halloween, Christmas, some of the traditional ones, and we had some great experiences with having people who aren't members of the church, or people who haven't been active for a long time, coming and participating and looking forward to those activities. Even participating. A lot of people, even if they say they're not interested in coming to church or investigating the church, they love to serve, and they love to bring food as part of it, or things like that. So
Yeah.
we look to involve them as much as we could.
Did you feel like, because I feel this resistance sometimes being in Utah, that you reach out to those people and they sort of they're resistant because they're like, I don't know, like creating that safety of like, no, really, you can come to this ward. We're not gonna like casually place you by the missionaries or like push, passive aggressively put some message on you. We just want you to come and bring the potato salad and enjoy your time here. Like, is there anything you did to help them feel more safe of actually showing up at the activity?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing. It's not like we put on the announcement that there's no pressure or things like that, but it's more about the individual relationships that those people had with their neighbors. And I don't know how many people came just by seeing a flyer, but if they had a neighbor who said, "Hey, did you see that flyer? You want to come join us?" And if they already have a relationship and they already had the experience of their neighbors not being pushy and um, not using that passive aggressive techniques, like you said, then I think that every touch point reinforces that, hopefully. And yeah, I think people come into a Utah ward, they know what the demographics are in Utah, and some people may be kind of on edge and watching for that, but we at least intended to overcome that.
Yeah. We have so many of these stories, like missionary stories of like, I took this Book of Mormon to work and gave it to this, my coworker. And those are great. And hopefully those are happening. But I think we often skip over this process of like building the relationship to the point that you can actually offer them a Book of Mormon. And it's not incredibly awkward. Right. And I'm just thinking like, I often frame this in the context of like temple open houses, which we're going to have a lot of those regardless of where you live in the world.
Yeah.
um, but like, what are you doing today? I'm in Twilla County. We're about 18 months out from probably our temple open house, right? And I'm often think like, what am I doing today so that in 18 months I can offer the invitation to the temple open house and it's not awkward, right? Or it's because that's, I think, what makes it feel pushy, or that you're pushing the religion on, is that I don't even know who you are, and suddenly you show up at my doorstep and you're asking me to this activity or this open house or this, like, and just the power of that casual chat at the mailbox, or walking over as they water their lawn and just shooting the breeze for a while, and establishing that relationship, so that when those invitations come up, it's not awkward because you've already have a relationship there.
Yeah, for sure. That reminds me of an experience we had early in the time I was called. We had a family of six move into our ward from, and I'm forgetting the state, but somewhere in the east, where they weren't very familiar with the church, and the father took a job here in Utah, and they experienced people just reaching out immediately, and not from a church perspective necessarily, but just from a neighborly perspective. You know, I can't remember all the different touch points that they had, but one of them was when I heard they were there, I just went over to say hi and asked what they might need, and they said, "Well, actually, we could really use a broom. Like our stuff isn't here yet, and we just have no way of cleaning our floor." So I thought, no big deal. I'll go grab a broom and take it over to them. And I heard actually several months later they remembered that as like a huge gesture that really made a difference to them, even though to me it was really nothing. And I don't remember the timeline, but it was um, within a few months they got baptized, and
Oh, cool.
and they moved out a little while later, but it was an incredible unifying experience for the ward, and just seeing the impact of that neighborly love can have. So.
Yeah. Next principle I have is one of a leader's most important role is creating other leaders around them, and that was probably really crucial in this transition as you were maybe helping the stake president think of names of the new bishop and whatnot. Hopefully, you had fostered some leadership ability in the ward to go to the next guy. So what did that principle look like in your experience?
Yeah, for me, it's really creating the environment and the opportunities for people to be involved and to develop their own experience and leadership. And it's it's not to say that a leader takes credit from for building someone from scratch. Everybody comes with their experience and their skills that they already have, but really fostering the opportunity to develop that. And yeah, that was really present to me. As I was coming to the end of my time as a bishop, is there's many like we talked about earlier, many men who could have stepped in, who was specifically prepared, and what role could I have in that preparation. And of course, I wouldn't know for sure what that looked like leading up to it, but in hindsight, it was pretty clear. I had one thing my stake president encouraged me to do early on was to switch out my counselors at times so that others would be able to gain the experience. And also in looking at my time as a bishop over 5 years as more of a marathon, and then the counselors could be more like a sprint where they you can burn them out and release them. But
yeah,
I had a couple that were released because they moved out, but one counselor was with me for about 3 years, and up until about 18 months ago, and I loved him. He was incredible support. We had a good routine going, and I had no desire to release him. I wanted him to finish out with me, but I felt at that point really strongly prompted to release him and look for a different counselor. And very reluctantly, I started thinking and praying about that, and very clearly, one man came to mind. And I'd known him; he was incredible man. Just again, one of those great men that we have many of in the ward. But I felt prompted to call him, and he was the one that was replaced me as bishop 2 weeks ago. And I can look back and see the experiences we had together, and not that I take any credit for it, but just the experiences he was able to have by being in that, being the bishopric for the first time for that year and a half was in great preparation for him.
Yeah, I love that. And so, was it? You said about 3 years. I mean, about halfway through, you swapped out your counselors.
Yeah, at different times. So I had one move out
Okay.
9 months in, another one move out about 2.5 years in. But the one that I called after 9 months was the one that was with me for the 3 years after that, and yeah, he was the only one that actually released from without being forced to, I guess, from move out.
Yeah. And, this is sometimes it's easy. You want to create some consistency in your leadership experience. And so let's get some good people in these callings and keep them in there as long as possible. And then, you saw this sort of as a missionary where we want to keep a missionary in an area as long as possible so that, they're building relationships or, they're getting a feel for the area, and let's just keep that momentum going. But at the same time, there's so many, like we said, in these saturated wards, there's so many people who could benefit from the experience. And in my, being in a inner city ward as bishop, I think by the time I was done, I had 7 or 8, like I had 7 or 8 total counselors during that time. And, sometimes it's like, oh, you're moving, like, man, we just got you in here, like, but at the same time, I think about all those men who have now moved on. different words, and now they can offer a different type of strength through that experience because they've been in a bishopric. Or I know some of them are bishops at this point, and I'm sure that time was a blessing to them. And so I just love that, like the shakeup. Maybe don't resist it as quickly as maybe you want to, because we're offering other people these opportunities. And at the end of the day, I just have a hard time believing that you're really disrupting, you know, these different organizations and award by switching them out. But I think at the end of the day, the work gets done, the ordinances get delivered, and we're blessed for it. So
yeah, and I think we're blessed in every aspect of it. If things go smoothly and everything goes great, then yeah, that's great. And when things don't go so smoothly and people mess up and all that, that's great too, because we're all learning from that. So yeah, I think it's I think there's a lot of wisdom too in the order of the church, where we have that consistency in leadership between bishops typically for 5 years or so and stake presidents for 9 years or so. So that provides that consistency. But then within the organizations, the more experience that can be gained during that time, the better.
Yep. Anything else with this principle of developing other leaders around you?
I don't want to skip over the idea of developing leaders and youth as well. That's a big focus in the church, and with the new children and youth program introduced during my time as a bishop, just a lot of emphasis on letting the youth lead. And not that I or the leaders I worked with were perfect in doing that, but that was always our intention, is to give the youth as much experience as we can and let them take the lead. The quorum class presidencies, and that was a great experience to be able to see them step up and see them fumble and learn. So I think that's a really important part of not just creating the immediate ward leaders, but the future ward and stake and church leaders.
Yeah. Is there any example, or like what did that look like in any example that comes to mind?
Yeah, I don't know if anything really profound or special comes to mind. Just the typical things, that the ward youth council, and using that as a training opportunity. We probably spent more time in actual training and discussion about what roles look like than we did on any kind of business or activities or planning or things like that.
Cool. All right. The last principle is love is giving people space to show up like they're perfect as they are. And this goes back to some things you already talked about, just that message of love and acceptance and whatnot. So how else did that manifest?
Yeah, I think it's really about each one of us and how we look at others in that idea of, I think sometimes our tendency is to look with judgment and look with, people's shortcomings or their sins or weaknesses or things like that, and what can we do to help? Sometimes we think that what service looks like is helping people improve, and I don't think that's really a useful way to look at it. If we, it's up to us individually to improve ourselves and to work with our Savior on that process of progression and improvement. And really, even as a bishop, my role in judgment is very, like, I see that as super limited. Limited in that there's specific cases where I, judge worthiness to go to the temple, or in working with people in their progression and preparation for missions and things like that. So there's very, very limited where I use judgment, but it's mostly just love, mostly knowing that almost everyone is always doing the best they know how to do at the time. And if we approach each other with that idea that everyone's doing their best, everybody is great where they're at, and yes, we can all progress, but it's up to us to progress. It's not up to us to progress other people.
Yeah. So I'm curious, like, just how you navigated that at the more difficult times, right? Because at the end of the day, there were moments where you had to sort of fully step into that judge in Israel, persona, and make some tough decisions when it comes to individuals and repentance and those things. And so, because I'm all for the acceptance and love and whatnot, but then there's those moments where it's like, no, there's something needs to change here, right? And so, how did you navigate that, and when did it become tricky?
Yeah, I don't know that I ever really experienced it as tricky. I'd say in most cases, people were much harsher judges on themselves than I would be, or that as I felt the Lord would be. And so I don't feel like I had to really make tough decisions. It was more like walking them back, like say, yeah, here's what's happened. What can we do about it? But like, that's why we have the atonement. I had, a picture of the Savior in the Garden of Gethsemane on my wall, and I can't count how many times I pointed to that picture. So this is why he did that. Yes, we do our best, and we don't want to intentionally plan to sin, but when we do, that's why we have the atonement. So really, my approach was to, again, coming back to that love and acceptance, love first. And sometimes in the first meeting, that's all it was. It was just love. And then maybe in the next meeting, we'll talk about, okay, what can we do to progress? But yeah, just really starting out with that, that approach of love.
I love that. Sometimes there's this feeling of, as a church leader, especially as a bishop, like I need to really make sure they're aware of how serious this is and what they've done is wrong. When in reality, they walk into that office knowing I've done something serious, or this is, I need to face this and figure this out. And the bishop can easily just slip into that encouragement mode of like, hey, listen, remember the atonement? Like nothing is wrong here because he made everything right. Like this is exactly what needs to happen. And, there's nothing unfortunate about this. And they want to improve. You want to help them. And here we go. Right.
Yeah. Especially with the youth, there's opportunity for teaching as well. And even the youth, they understand, they know that they messed up. And again, they probably think it's way more serious than I would see it, or that the Lord would see it. But there were times where we'd start with that love and acceptance, but also just planting the idea that, yeah, this is the first time, or you're whatever that might look like. This conversation might be a little bit different if it keeps repeating, and if you're intentionally planning on sinning and repenting, that conversation will be a little bit different. But that's very rare. I can hardly even think of a time where I've had to, or felt like I needed to have that conversation.
Yeah. It can be so diverse as far as the approaches when it comes to like repentance and how you approach that individual who walks in your office and whatnot. But I've just found that people's experience with that repentance process, especially in the bishop's office, can be all over the map. And so, not that you've figured it out or you have the 5-point plan that works every time, but like, what was your general approach, especially with youth who walk in there and they're there to repent?
My experience, and not that it was an intentional approach, I just attempted to feel the situation, feel their sincerity, feel what the Lord would have me say. And I was almost always surprised at how much quicker and how much easier the repentance process is than I would have guessed, or that especially the youth would have known. Often it was, they tell me afterwards, or the end of the meeting, like, it's such a relief. Like, this is way more pleasant, way easier, not nearly as hard as they thought it might be. And it's not to make light, of course, of sin, but it's like, it's a reminder of how forgiving the Lord is, and we have the Savior, and He is anxious to forgive us. All we need to do is, come with a broken heart and a contrite spirit, and be doing our best. And He's so quick and anxious to forgive us.
Yeah, that's powerful. So your release, have you got a new calling?
Nothing yet. No.
Okay, we've got a free agent in Daybreak, so the word is, I'm sure your stake president has all sorts of plans, or your new bishop, right? So
I don't know. I joke with my bishop that the new bishop, that I don't aspire at all, but I do aspire to be the primary pianist. That's what my calling
really?
was before I was called, and I'd love to go back to that. But don't tell the current pianist. I'm sure she wouldn't be happy about that. But
there's a passive aggressive war for the piano in primary, so
exactly, yeah.
That's cool. Well, David, the last question I have for you is just reflecting on these past 5 years or so, being the bishop, being the leader. How has that experience of being the leader helped you become a better follower of Jesus Christ?
I think part of it comes back to recognizing how merciful the Lord is, and recognizing feeling that love through me that he has for his children, and just being recommitted myself into following him, and to recognizing and feeling that love, and then communicating that love to other people. I think that the idea of love, and the feeling and understanding better the love of God, is probably probably one of the biggest things that comes to mind.